Okay, it is indeed live. So
Great.
I'll minimize that window. I've got our questions up. Hi
Cool.
everyone. Hi Kate. How you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How are you yourself?
I'm doing pretty well. We had a little bit of some technical difficulties, so I apologize for
Okay,
that. But thank you
it is
everyone.
indeed live.
Thank you
Great.
for. I'll minimize that window. Oh, I'm hearing my own audio in the background. That's what's happening. Hi
Cool.
everyone. Hi Kate. How you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How are you yourself?
I'm doing okay. Perfect. Some technical stuff to figure out there. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Jordan. Welcome to the 1YSC YouTube channel. I am the 1 Year Sustainability Challenge creator. I'm here today
How
with
are you
Kate
yourself?
Schapira, and we are just so excited to talk about Kate's new book, excuse me, excuse me, Lessons from the Climate Anxiety Counseling Book, How to Live with Care and Purpose in an Endangered World. So, I would love to read a little introduction about your book, Kate, and then we'll get into letting you introduce yourself and all the wonderful things that you do. In 2014, Kate Schapira set up the Climate Anxiety Counseling booth in her hometown of Providence, Rhode Island. Far fewer people were talking about climate change and its attendant anxiety, leaving those who couldn't ignore climate change and the forces that cause it feeling frantic and alone. Seeking a way to reach out and connect, Shapira set up a peanut style The Doctor is In booth to talk about climate change with her community. 10 years later, and over 1,300 conversations later, Shapira channels all she's learned into an accessible, understandable, and aware guide for processing climate anxiety and connecting with others to carry out real change in your life and in your community. Now we have the opportunity to talk to Kate herself. So, Kate, please introduce yourself.
Well, you did a lot. You just did a lot of it. But some things that weren't in what Lauren said are I lived in Providence, Rhode Island for about 20 years. And have also had the honor of being organized by people living here to try to improve living conditions here, make them more livable and more just. I love moss very much. I love to be outside with creatures. Um, and right now I'm in my office at Brown University where I work. And I am very glad to be here. Delighted to kind of embark on this next phase of this work with all of you.
Fantastic. We got some feedback in the chat that my audio is a bit louder, or excuse me, is much quieter than Kate's, so I have just adjusted the settings. Thank you so much for that feedback in the chat. Please let me know if that is better. I also really love moss. I'm super excited to hear you say that. We actually have some moss growing on our yard right now. We're really wanting to turn our yard into a meadow to encourage the local pollinators. So there's a little bit of moss growing, and that's very exciting that it's not just standard grass. All right.
Moss rules. It's
Yeah, moss is the best.
Robin Wall Kimmerer, I think, has a whole book about it. Like, there's just no end to its delights.
All right. So, do you have any other plants? Are you into other plants as well? I'm just curious.
I don't have a lot of light in my house, so I don't have a lot of plants that live indoors of my house. But there's a little backyard. There are some evergreens living back there, also some moss. Also, some raspberry bushes growing in a pot that are cuttings that my mom gave me. And I also sometimes garden on a plot of land about 25 minutes from my house, where we're working on growing some medicinal herbs and other plants, including some plants that pollinators like also.
Fantastic. Is that like through like a community garden situation?
Yeah, it's shared. So there's like a few people who decide what we're going to plant, and we let it slide a little bit last year, so we're hoping to unslide it this summer.
Well, I'm super excited to see what you end up doing. All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk about the booth a little bit. Is the booth still operating?
The booth is still operating. During kind of like the lowest trough point of COVID, I stopped doing it for a while. I couldn't really figure out a way to do it safely. Now I'll do it when I do it indoors. I do it masked, and when I'm outdoors, I feel like it's probably okay. Uh, I do it at recently. I've been doing it at a couple of indoor winter markets once a month, and I also have done it a couple of times over the fall at a couple of regional environmental justice convenings to be a listener there in a few different places around the country. And tomorrow I'm going down to Warren, Rhode Island to do it at a community mental health fair there with my apprentice Eli. I have apprentices this year, Eli and Angela, and working with them has been really wonderful.
That's really, really cool. So you've done it at a couple different places. You mentioned like a market, and is the atmosphere or like the reception different depending on the environment that you're doing the booth in?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's different depending on when I do it at the big bus station downtown, which is where I started it in 2014. People are there for really different reasons than they're at the market for. And then they'll be at the mental health fair for different reasons again. And they were at the environmental justice convening for different reasons again. So that's going to affect how long people have to spend with me, where their attention is. Um, of course, there's also demographic considerations. If you are at the farmers market, you might have money. But then again, the farmers market also doubles your SNAP. So you might be somebody who is there using your EBT benefits and your SNAP benefits to get extra vegetables. So it does vary, but I wouldn't say that unless it's like a very specific, let's say like an event related to a particular profession, um, I wouldn't say that there are like there isn't like a characteristic farmers market person.
Yeah, there's not like a a stereotype. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have stereotypes about who goes to the farmers market, and definitely some people who fit that stereotype come up to me, but that's not the only person who comes up to me at the farmers market.
Right. Okay, well,
Am I talking at a good pace?
yeah.
Should I?
No, you're
Okay.
you're doing great. Uh, what about not so much the public's reception, but the support that you're getting from the actual events? Does that change? Like, do you find that you're getting more support from those environmental events, or are they? Like, I'm just like curious to know what the actual like event planners like what kind of support they're giving you.
It really depends. I think like if they invited me specifically, like we want you to come and be a listener at this thing, then they will sometimes be like a little more like, hey, do you have everything you need? Um, if it's more like I wrote to them and said, hey, I have this thing that I set up, can I do it where you're doing your thing? Then they'll be like, sure, here's your spot.
Yep.
We'll see you later. We've got a number of other people to wrangle.
Do folks tend to be more excited or involved like closer to like Earth Day?
Eh, no, not really. But what I will also say is that this is really, it's much more common for me to start doing the booth later in the spring because I do it outside.
Mm-hmm.
And this year has actually been an unusual year for me in that I've done a lot of indoor iterations of it. So Earth Day is usually not even an issue because in late April in New England, it's too cold to sit outside for 3 hours at a
Totally.
time.
That makes sense. I was thinking there was a year my mother and I were doing the farmers market because she makes quilts and I also do some crafting stuff. And they actually did like a whole Earth Day, like month kind of theme for April. And I remember thinking that was very cool. And they actually did like a very similar thing for Juneteenth. And for in North Carolina, I thought that was like, oh, way to set an example of something that other farmers markets could be doing.
No, that's
Yeah. So you've had 1,300 conversations about climate anxiety, or about 1,300, you said.
yeah, give
I
or take.
believe in the book it says about 1,200, but obviously some time has passed since then. Uh, you already mentioned that there's not really like a stereotype of a person, But are there any examples of like trends in thought or thinking or like just general fears that you notice or have noticed over time?
I mean, there's a few answers to that. I would say that over time, people who are experiencing climate change effects in their actual lives, there are more of them. Um, when I started doing it in 2014, a lot of people thought of it in terms of something that was like very far away. They would speak about their children and their grandchildren. They would speak about distant island nations. Um, they would speak about the polar ice caps. People do still do that, but there's much more of a sense of immediacy that has grown over the past 10 years as people have both seen more and more extremely severe climate impacts and then also often experience those impacts in their own lives. Um, Here in Rhode Island, we got, I think, 2 moderate snowfalls this winter. People noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
So even though that didn't injure anybody in a direct way that they could see, they experienced it directly and they noticed that and they've been talking to me about it.
Just for folks that aren't from Rhode Island, what is like the normal amount of snowfall that you would get?
Way more than that. I don't know things like how many feet or anything like
That's
that.
fine.
But it would snow. It was when we first moved here. It snowed more often, and there was more snow at a time. And snow stayed on the ground quite a bit longer as well.
I think that's the main takeaway that I feel like I've taken from since I was a child to an adult is I feel like the weather has been much more back and forth, chaotic. Like even just yesterday, it was like 70 something degrees, and it's back down to like the 40s. I want to say, yeah, high of 58. So I mean, yeah, that's I can definitely see how more people would probably become aware over time. Uh, do you find when folks are coming to you with their concerns, like obviously that's putting you in a very it's putting you in a position where you have to give some level of emotional care to these people, and you've kind of through the whole booth is kind of putting yourself in this situation where you are both educating but you're also offering some level of emotional support because it's specifically addressing this idea of anxiety. How do you balance making yourself accessible to people like that but also like maintaining your own sense of like self balance in yourself?
That's a really good question. I mean, I guess the first thing that I will say is that um, the booth actually helps with the balance. I started doing the booth because I was having trouble having these conversations in other settings, just like with friends or with people I work with. I would respond with a very high level of anxiety and emotional intensity, and they would kind of look at me like maybe I was not okay or like maybe I was nuts. And I wasn't okay, but I also wasn't nuts. And as you know, unfortunately, time has shown, right? Like I wish I would have been nuts. I wish I would have been wrong about all of it, but I wasn't, and I'm not. And talking with people at the booth drew people to me who were also feeling that way. They were feeling alone with their knowledge of climate change, their emotional reactions to it, how it made them feel, the whatever the feeling was, whether it was like anger or grief or despair, was kind of compounded by this isolation that they felt. Like no one is talking with me about this. I don't know how to talk about it. The ways that I have of talking about it aren't really working. And because I also shared that, then all of a sudden neither of us were alone anymore, right? Like we were both joined in this experience, even though it was a bad experience. And so I think that actually helped me regain my balance in a certain way because what I was feeling inside of me was matching what I was hearing from a person who was standing across from me. And the thing that makes you feel nuts is to have what you perceive not match the way that other people are feeling and behaving. More behaving because you don't always know what other people are feeling. So I think that was, for me, that was actually a benefit of doing the booth that I didn't expect, although maybe I hoped for it. Then I think also another piece of the answer to that question is the booth is something that physically, it's small, it's made out of garbage, it's about as wide as my body is, but it does physically stand in between me and whoever I'm talking to. And I think that it creates, in doing that, in being a thing that's surprising to look at, unusual, not something you'd maybe encounter on your day to day, I think that it creates a kind of form or framework the way that like a doctor's office would be, even though I'm actually not a doctor of any kind, or the way that like the toll booth is that the toll booth operator sits in. There's a framing there that says this is the kind of time that we're having, and it's almost like wearing a costume, right? Like I put on the role of the person who sits behind the booth, and that person isn't very different from me, but she's a little bit different from me. And so then that is the person that people are talking to. The amount that I'm talking to you right now is way longer than I would ever try to talk at the booth. When it's at its best, it's a listening practice. It's listening to whatever the person is saying, and making small noises or comments to kind of draw out what they're talking about a little further, maybe asking a question or two now and then to elaborate more on what it is that they're feeling or thinking or seeing, or probe them on a position that they're taking maybe, or redirect something that sort of feels like it's circling the drain, but not so much of me talking at a time in this way.
You said a lot of really interesting things there that I want to kind of talk about. Uh, I could fully see how it would be very difficult to have these kind of conversations, especially when there is nobody in your life modeling them, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And like in this way, you are thereby modeling this behavior for others so that they can see how to get those tools. You learn through example, right? And even just like when I think about like a professional working environment, like you learn how to be more professional by seeing other people be professional, and learning by example. And specifically like the template of the doctor's office was a very interesting call out, because you're taking a situation most people have been in, which is going to the doctor's office, and you're just, changing the theme slightly. But yeah, that's a very good analogy, and I can totally, that's very interesting. That you're putting on a character, and I'm almost curious to know. I would be very curious to hear what, I know that you've talked with psychologists and people like that, and what has like those kind of conversations been like? Have you gotten tools from them for kind of navigating that?
Well, I mean, for one, I'm in therapy. So, like, I pay attention to what my therapist does and
Yes.
what she doesn't do. And I've definitely borrowed some stuff from her. Although, again, I really must emphasize, not a medical doctor in any way. Cannot treat you for anything. Which is another reason why I try not to talk too terribly much.
Mm-hmm.
I'll sometimes give people like suggestions toward the end if they want them. But really only if they want. I hope only if I want them. We can come back to that. But yeah, when I interviewed people who do this more professionally for the book, I think a lot of the emphasis again was on non-judgmental listening, the invitation to the person to speak a little bit more, making room, making space for people to speak into. And so I think I do try to do those things in the work of the booth. And in conversations that are about climate change that aren't held at the booth, too. I think it's changed the way that I have the conversations outside of that framework.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So do people could I can see people getting very you're because you're addressing when you're talking about something that is kind of loaded, which is climate change, and some people deny that it exists, and then the rest of us acknowledge its existence, and are trying to like talk about it in a way that is productive. And you also talked about avoiding getting in that spiral. And something I really loved about this book is you are specifically trying to address that step from anxiety to doing something with that. And I just really feel like that is exactly what a lot of people need right now. I feel like we're at a point now where the majority of people now understand that climate change is real, and they're actually like there's the period of like learning and doing a lot of research and realizing, oh, actually it's much much worse than I thought it was. And then you can kind of fall down that kind of pit of despair. And I know we all kind of fall in this every once in a while, but like what are your main like tips that you give to folks for crawling back out of that tip of that pit of despair if they are happen to be in that pit of despair when they are talking to you?
I mean, it depends on the person and what else they've said. Um, but one of the things that I do, so sometimes people will come up and they'll be like, they'll either say like, "Are we fucked? Like, are we doomed? Are we fucked?" And or they'll say, or they'll just say it. They'll say, "We're fucked. We're totally fucked." And what I'll sometimes say in those situations is, "Well, if that's true, what do you want to do? How do you want to behave? Who do you want to be?" And then listen to what they say. And then, how do you want to, how do you want to do that? Who could help you do that? What would allow you to do that? Who do you want to work with to do that? Or they might say, if they say that, if they say, "Are we doomed? Are we fucked?" I might say like, "Well, fucked how? Doomed to what? What are you imagining?" Right. So I have some sort of like semi-standard, like I feel the desire to shut down, but also they are coming up to me, right? They are asking the question. They want something. They want something that they can't arrive at by themselves. Right? That's why they're talking to a rando sitting behind a booth made out of garbage. They want something that they can't come up with themselves. And yet, if it's just me telling them things, that's gonna bounce off. It's gonna slide off. It's gonna sound like some little, bumper stickery thing that didn't come from them and so can't stay with them. And so that's why I kind of turn to some of these questions to see if there is like something in them that can kind of answer their own question or start to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very wise, actually. No, that makes perfect sense.
That kind of from teaching is actually where I feel like that comes from. Like I've been a teacher for a really long time, most of my working life. And what I slowly realized over many years of doing this is that the connections that people make, the points that they arrive at, the collaborations they create, the thoughts that they build upon, they are so much more like exciting, complicated, challenging, and retained if they come up with them themselves or come up with them together. And so I think that's something that I kind of brought from my teaching life into this other strange thing.
Can you explain what you mean by retained?
They just stay with them more. They mean more to them.
I see. Thank you. That's I because you're kind of making it a little more intimate and personal and about them, kind of. And I kind of feel like people's favorite thing is hearing about themselves or thinking about themselves. So if you could, like, in a way, this is a marketing thing, but if you can make it about them, you've got them, kind of.
Well, they're making it about them. I mean, I'm not even doing that. Like they're going into whatever they've got in there, and they're seeing, what's down there. I think maybe what talking to me does is it allows them to look.
Yeah.
Where they weren't looking in there before. They just weren't. I mean, a lot of the time, I think people just weren't looking. They were like, they were like, this makes me feel horrible. I can't possibly have an answer to this. And sometimes their answer is also not so hot. Like sometimes, like there's a thing that if I can go on a tangent for a minute, there's a thing that I've been noticing in recent sessions, where people will come up to the booth, and the booth on the front, it just says climate anxiety counseling, 5 cents, here to listen, right? That's what it says now. And pretty quickly they will start talking defensively about the stuff that they do, maybe at the household level. Usually it's at the household level, right? So like trying to bike more than they drive, or like trying to compost, things like that. All of which are great things to do. But there is a defensiveness that I've really been noticing lately, and that emphasis on individual action. I mean, we know that that's something that comes from fossil fuel companies speaking of marketing. Quite literally, like, we have the memos. We know that that is something that, like, British Petroleum, for example, coming up with the idea of the carbon footprint. That's something that they tried to do to make it less, to obfuscate the notion that collective action and a collective reduction in fossil fuel use are the major ways that we're going to survive this time. So part of it is just that messaging really stuck and was really effective. Maybe because, as you say, it was, oh, this is about you. This is about what you can do, and it's also about whether you're good or bad. In the present moment, it also feels a little bit like, as soon as they see the sign, it reads to them a little bit like an accusation, like you should be more anxious. And so there's an undercurrent. Again, this is not everybody, but in a few people who have talked to me, that's kind of like, get off my back. Like, I'm really doing as much as I can here. Can you please get off my back? Have you seen the world now? And so that's a moment where, like, I sort of have to decide, can I kind of work us around to the idea that I'm not mad at them. I don't know whether they're doing anything wrong or not, because I don't know them, but I'm not here to give them a hard time. But I'm interested in whether the things that they're doing at the moment feel to them like the right things to be doing, and if they'd like any other ideas.
I like that a lot.
So it's
Uh,
a sort of, it's a slightly different approach, I think, than I might use with someone who was coming up to me and saying, like, I'm just so freaked out all the time.
yeah. I so it sounds like different folks like take a different like nuanced approach basically in how you respond to them when they come to the booth. And that kind of like leads into like the book itself, where it's clearly this is a very nuanced topic. There's a lot to say about this. When did you realize that the booth was becoming more than just the booth and that it was going to become something else?
It didn't take super long to figure out that as an organizing tool, the booth is not so hot, right? It's something that, as I was having these conversations, I was hearing people saying, like, I feel so alone. The actions that I know about that I can take feel so small. Um, I'm only one person, right? What can I do? And so the kind of knee jerk answer that came up in my brain was, you got to be more than one person. But what does that actually mean? How do you do that? And a piece of that fell into place when I started learning more about the landscape of climate and environmental justice organizing in my city, in my region. I could start telling people, oh, have you heard of this group of people? They're trying to stop a liquefied natural gas plant from being built in Providence. Can I put you in touch with them? Or, oh, like, you mentioned really loving, like, trees and birds. Have you talked with any of the Audubon Society branches around here? I know that they have some good climate programming, stuff like that. And so that was sort of a piece that fell into place, and that also meant that I was getting more involved, as I said, in some of those organizing efforts and learning more about them, what kinds of things they needed. So if somebody came and they said, well, God, like, I'm a computer programmer, I could be like, well, could you help people, like, build some sort of tool for doing XYZ? Is that something that you could do for a grassroots organizing group that maybe doesn't have anybody who has that kind of expertise? So that was cool and everything, but it still kind of left me as like the bottleneck for a lot of this information. And mind you, part of that is on me. Like, it is sort of telling to me that when I started doing this, I did this little booth thing rather than, say, Googling environmental justice organizations near Providence, right? Like, I didn't do that. Same thing with climate anxiety itself. There are researchers who were working on this before I was. Renee Lertzman is one, Sarah Jaquette Ray is another. Both of them have terrific resources. Lertzman's project Inside Out is a kind of toolkit for doing some of the things at like the level of like organizations and companies that I invite people to do at like the community level. So I didn't look up any of that. I didn't know about any of that. I just went out and did my little thing. And so very quickly, as you might imagine, I started finding out the limitations of that little thing, which is, generally speaking, one person, maybe two people who know each other, maybe two people who don't know each other are talking to me at a time. And so that's not a great, it's a good format for a lot of the things that I was describing earlier that the booth is good at, but it's not a great format for equipping people for collective action. And so I tried to think of some ways to do that. And besides kind of connecting people with the efforts that I found out were going on, tried a couple of things, didn't work great. And so I was still kind of poking around and looking for like, what's the thing, what's the pattern, what's the method. And then in the fall of 2018, a woman came up to the booth and told me that she is a climate scientist and that she had become an environmental justice organizer because of what she was seeing in the city where she lived. And that person was Nicole Hernandez Hammer, who's the first person that you see interviewed in the book. And that conversation really was the catalyst for the book portion of this, because among the things that we talked about were, how do you equip people to meet as a community the changes that are coming to the place where they live? And she, because of the areas of environmental justice work that she had done, a lot on sea level rise and coastal issues, she was really thinking of it at a community scale in a way that I had not been. And so that was another piece that she kind of put into place for me. And that I then, we've remained friends and we've had a lot of conversations about all the different aspects of this. And that notion that like people needed ways to help one another prepare both practically and emotionally, and that those things, the practical emotion and emotional preparation, could be tied together, was really a piece that she brought into place for me. And so I started thinking about what would equip people to do that? What would get people feeling strong enough to do that? And the two things that I thought of were hearing from people who had already done it and having some ways to practice doing it before they had to do it. And then I kind of realized, oh, wait, that actually applies to a lot of this stuff. It applies to gathering, connecting in our neighborhoods, on our streets, in our, if you don't have a neighborhood because you live in a rural place, then with whoever your closest neighbors are, aligning yourself with the non-human creatures who are also your neighbors to try to survive this time. It also applies to transforming ourselves into the people who we need to be to meet this time. It applies to changing to meet these changes. People are going to want examples of people who are in the process of doing that or have already done it at least once. And they're going to want exercises or ways, or at least that was my idea at the time. They're going to want ways to try it before they have to try it, before they have to do it for real. And so that's really the place where the book started to take the shape that it eventually became.
That was a great answer. Thank you. I was actually wondering if you wanted to kind of walk us through one of the exercises in the book.
Yeah, let's do a couple. So the book the way the exercises in the book work, I should say for people who haven't read it, are all of them have some questions for reflection, and then those questions can kind of move us into practicing something. Sometimes it's practicing like just living with what this stuff makes us feel. That can be like just dealing with it, just having it, just like kind of, here it is. I guess it's here now. I guess I feel this feeling. Or it can be attempting to like pay attention to or like move that feeling around in your body in some way. Some of the exercises are more just for like kind of challenging each other through conversation. And some of them are for like actually materially practicing something that you might need to do, like creating a mutual aid network, for example, or figuring out like if somebody has to leave their home and they have to come and stay with you, how will you get ready to receive them? Can you have that conversation with the people who live in your house? What will we do if so and so calls and says, I got flooded out, my house burned down, I need a place to stay, and so does the dog, right? How do you get ready for that? And then some of them are like, hey, like let's plan a big celebratory funeral of something that climate change is taking from the place where we live. And we'll have a parade, or we'll have a gathering, or we'll like, rip our garments and put ashes on our face. But what will we do? What will it be like? Let's plan that. And if we like our plan, we can do it. So there's a really big range. And in trying to think through the ones that we might do today, Lauren and I tried to find ones that like could be done remotely and could be done through conversation. You are also welcome as we try these. Lauren, can you still see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I moved a window. That's all. As we do this together, you all are welcome to kind of try it along with us. So the first one is just one for like kind of processing feeling. And then the second one is one for like reflection and a little bit of like imaginative challenge. And so for the first one, you can just try doing it with us at home. I will describe it in just a moment. And then for the second one, you're welcome to kind of add your impressions to the chat if you like. So, all right, the first exercise that we're going to try is called Steadying Your Nerves. You can use it anytime. But it will be particularly useful to you if you react to anxiety with agitation and escalation. And the person who shared it with me, Caroline Cantillo, who's also interviewed in the book, is a disaster resilience social worker. And so one of the things that this is a thing now, right? So she's preparing people in communities to meet these effects of climate change with not just with less anxiety, but also with more capacity for mutual care. So if you're not used to handling strong emotion by doing a deliberate physical thing, this practice might feel strange and beside the point, but it has a physiological reason for working that is written in the book, but I'm not going to explain because it's boring. So the first question, I'm going to ask a question, and then after Lauren answers it, we're both going to take a deep breath and breathe out on a low, deep hum. And if you can't hear, or if you can't make sounds, try rounding out your lips and blowing steadily and hard, like. And then Lauren's going to ask me that question, and we're going to make the sound again. So you're also welcome to make the sound with us as you watch. So, Lauren, what is a specific worry or fear that you have about climate change?
That I could be doing more and I'm not doing enough.
Okay.
And
So let's
letting.
breathe in. Now you ask me.
So, Kate, what's a specific worry or fear that you have about climate change?
That when people who have no other place to go come to my city, the people who live here will receive them ungenerously and do harm to them because of that. Okay, so sometimes after I do the exercises with people, I like to kind of say, like, what was that like? How did it feel? What was that like?
I mean, I was like nervous because I'm like doing it in front of people and I'm like, oh, am I gonna do it wrong? But also, it's like it's just breathing and answering a question honestly. Like I can do that.
Totally. And it is hard. It feels weird. It feels weird to do stuff that we don't usually do. That is like baseline, right? Like, of course, no matter if the things that are in the book are things that you don't usually do, then it is 100% going to feel weird to do them. And that is really I honor that. I salute it. I salute you for trying the weird thing. Lauren, I salute you for trying the weird thing.
I
Here's
salute
why I
you.
think that, thank you. I appreciate it. Here's why I think that's valuable. As the climate changes, a lot of us are going to have to do a lot more shit that we don't usually do. It is useful to practice with a very, 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 very small thing. And as my mom is infuriatingly often reminding me, what we practice, we get better at. If we practice being rigid, we get better at being rigid. If we practice doing stuff that's new for us, we get better at doing stuff that's new for us. So I appreciate you trying that with me.
Thank you.
If people tried it at home and they want to say in the chat how it was, or whether they hate me now, you can do that. The other thing that I will say is that when I try to do the ones like that, and I don't know if I succeeded in this, you'll have to tell me. I try really, really hard not to sound like a yoga teacher about it, because I think that just makes people mad.
Yeah, it's hard not to have that direct comparison too, right? Like if you're already someone who does like a meditative practice, like this is gonna probably feel really familiar to you. And there, I don't know if you can. I think I salute you for trying to avoid that, but yeah.
I mean, with some people, it's also probably fine. Lots of people go to yoga. Um, all right, let's do the talking one, the more talking one. This is an exercise called turning it around. And when you're doing it with strangers or acquaintances, it works best with people who perceive you as being like them in important ways. So, like members of your religious congregation, your faith congregation, for example, coworkers, because those are often people who kind of in their in their dealings with one another, in your dealings with you, and their dealing in your dealings with them, they think they know what to expect. And this is a good conversation for kind of interrupting a little bit what we expect. It is also a good way to identify the abundance, the strength, the flexibility, and the welcome that already exists in our communities, and also activate the kind of much more that I think we're capable of. On my good days, I think we're capable of it. So the questions are: how will we make room for everyone who needs housing? How will we find food for everyone who needs food? And Lauren and I are going to try to answer those questions for real, about our respective communities, not as like gotcha questions, not as like, oh, we can't possibly make room for everyone who needs housing, even though that is often a way that that question might be asked. How can we possibly make room for everyone who needs housing? No, make it a real question. How will we make room for everyone who needs housing? How will that happen, Lauren, where you are living?
So I believe that there's a lot of. So, for example, there's a mall that has a lot of empty space in it, and there are a lot of big office buildings like that that have a lot of space in them. And I do believe that there is a lot of real estate that is sitting unused in just across the country, but especially in my community that I think could very easily be just cleaned out and turned into housing in an emergency like that. And even honestly, in my own home, we have like at least one spare room that we could coordinate that. So, and I'm even thinking about in a situation. I actually live in what is called like the furniture capital of the world. So, in a situation like being able to find like a bed really fast, being able to find table chairs very quickly to be able to give people places to sit and sleep or be able to eat, I think would be fairly easy, and I know exactly where I would go to be able to find those kinds of things. So not just from the housing perspective, but also from the how do I get these people some things that can make something feel more like housing and not just a big empty room. That's also something that I know that I could access. And then there's also a soup kitchen that I know where it is located in terms of feeding people. And then I also know where the community garden is, and that one I'm gonna think on some more.
I love the furniture thing though. I love that you were like, "Oh, this is actually something that my community specifically is rich in." Like, you are rich in furniture, and you
Yes.
know that. That's like a strength of your community. That's exactly the kind of thinking that I think this exercise challenges people to do. And you're absolutely right. Like, what a fucking bummer to like flee a terrible storm or a terrible fire and then have to like sleep on the floor in a sleeping bag for a
Mm-hmm.
month. No one wants to have to do that, and no one should have to do that. And it sounds like where you're from, people probably wouldn't have to do that. So I think that was very exciting and like delightful to hear. I mean, I think so. I live in a city. I live in the city of Providence, where there are definitely like empty structures and empty places in the mall, and other malls that are empty out of town. So that's definitely a resource we could use as well. But also it is a place that's, and there's, empty housing and stuff like that, but it's also a place that's pretty dense and where people are kind of constantly bemoaning the lack of and the insufficiency of housing stock. And so the number one thing that I think I would probably say, as it applies to my town, is rent stabilization. If we have rent stabilization now, we will be able to kind of maintain the possibility of new housing being open to people who need it. Because it won't be like a constant like shunting that will happen of people, and then people raising the rent and shunting and people raising the rent and shunting and people raising the rent, right? So that's the thing that I would argue for. I'd say do it now. That will mean that new housing will also have it. That will mean that people will be able to afford to make a home here. Another thing that I'm thinking out of also, in a much more short-term way, there's been discussion, I know, of a safe lots program where people who are staying in their car could have a safe place to park overnight, maybe near to a place where they could use a restroom or plug into some of a building's electricity. So something like that could also be valuable in the short term if people had come in their vehicles, right, in their cars or in their trucks. So that's one thing. And then, and the same thing with tents, right? Like people being able to set up a tent, people working as a team to set up sanitation, to set up trash collection in the short term, instead of being extremely hostile to people who are living outside, which is something that the city is definitely doing now. In terms of the question of food, I actually kind of want to tell a story that was told to me by Angela Blanchard, who's a disaster expert based in Houston. And she told the story of how after one of the hurricanes, the big grocery store chain over that way, which is called HEB, rolled in with mobile units, with food, with ways for people to charge their phones, with ways for people to fill prescriptions. They brought pharmacy trucks. So that's something that we could consider setting up and equipping grocery stores to do. It's something that we could push grocery stores to make part of their budget. They just did it. I think they do it a lot, from what I can gather. This is a service that they provide post-disaster. Longer term, I think increasing the capacity of the city to grow food can't hurt. But you're right, it is a larger question because the food that you can grow in a small local location is mostly fruits and vegetables, and that's not enough to keep you going. So it is a harder question, but I think it's one that, one that smarter people than me are working on. Thank God.
As soon as I really got into gardening, I started realizing like, oh, just how tumultuous like food really is, and we spend a lot of resources on food, but also it's necessary. Like it is one of the few things that like we actually need to survive. Where it's like this is, it is one of those key problems. That's yeah, it's very complicated, especially when you talk about like transporting food. Growing food locally, of course, is like the best. And obviously, like, but I don't know if you even knew this, but the growing zones changed recently. Like, there was actually a shift in the growing zones, and that's a whole other conversation too, related to climate change. But yeah, it takes a lot of space to grow a lot of enough food to feed even just one person full time. That it is much definitely a much larger problem.
So like are people how will people, using the soup kitchen structure to make bigger meals to distribute what people have in
Mm-hmm.
storage? Again, like working with big warehouses, big grocery chains to redistribute some of the resources that they have. Would they do it? I don't know. Everybody's got choices, right? Anybody can make a choice. Um, they could make a choice that's different than the one they make right now.
Yeah. Well,
There's food around.
there's food everywhere.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just yeah, there's food everywhere.
Can you talk someone into giving it to you? Can you pay for it? Can you gather people together and pay for it? Can you make an arrangement where you'll pay them later? Can you create a kind of bucket brigade to get it across the flooded area? All of these are things that we might end up having to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you, Kate. Was we had a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah.
I would love to go ahead and shift over to those. I really appreciated you walking us through the exercise. Uh, I highly recommend folks pick up the book to try out the other exercises in the book as well. This question comes from Stevie. How has your relationship to the booth and to the practice change over the years that you've been doing it?
Nice question. I would say that I used to talk more and now I talk less. Uh, I guess somebody who has known me the whole time and has come to the booth more than once would have to say that whether that's true. I think I try to listen more. I think I'm better at not arguing than I was at the beginning. I used to argue some, and then I recognized that that was very counterproductive and annoying for me and annoying for the other person. Um, and so but it took me, I'm an argumentative person by nature. And so it took me, or by habit, I guess. And so it took me a long time to be able to argue less, but I think that change is settled. Um, I think that, I used to give people suggestions way sooner, and now I really hold off till the very end if I give it at all. Um, I think that because my sense of all of the different ways that it's possible to be active in climate in like suitable, appropriate, life affirming climate response has expanded. I think when I do make a recommendation, it's likelier to be like a more nuanced recommendation. Um, I think those are some of the ways. Also, I'm older. I'm 10 years older. Uh, my body is stiffer and weaker. And I sometimes now drive the booth where I'm going rather than wheeling it down on the hand truck. Also, the tires of my hand truck are completely busted and I need to get new ones. But when I used to do it, I would pack the whole Michigas onto a hand truck and I would like walk it down about 15, 20 minutes to the spot where I would do it. And the combination of the stiff body and the busted wheels have meant that I have been driving it sometimes. So that's another way that it's changed.
I mean, honestly, really impressed that you wheeled it for as long as you did. Like,
Well, it's not that heavy. Like the heaviest thing is and that's just plywood.
so I had a question, another question, which was from Stevie, which was
Mm-hmm.
in your experience and observation, what is made possible for people by the fact that you, the person they're talking to, is a stranger? This is a really good question, Stevie.
That is a really good question. Yeah, that question rules. Uh, I think that when you talk to a stranger, they don't. I'm not putting what they say to me in any kind of context of knowing them. Um, I'm not gonna like challenge them on the grounds of something else that I know about them because I don't know anything about them. Um, I don't even have to know their name. I know how they appear to me, but that's really it. And also, they don't ever have to deal with me again if they don't want to. So there's a I I'm guessing, but this seems to be true based on how people do speak to me. I think there's a freedom in that not only do I not know where they're coming from, I also don't know where they're going. And there isn't it's not whatever they say to me is not necessarily going to follow them around because of anything I do. And I think that that allows people maybe to access things in themselves that they want to say that they wouldn't say to someone who they sat down to dinner with every week or even met in an office every couple of weeks or worked with every day or organized with every day. Like it's just um there's no like blowback attached to talking to me, and
Yeah,
I think that's freeing.
yeah, that yeah. I've even thinking also in the perspective that you kind of talk about how you put on a character, which even is even another level, another layer, kind of to that separation. Even then, because you're not even truly being yourself there. You're kind of both putting this putting the who you are aside to have this conversation towards a more productive means. It's very very interesting question, Stevie. Thank you. So Kate, do you have any signings or local events coming up in Providence for the book?
Why, yes. I am so delighted to be able to report that on April 14th at 5:30 p.m. At Riff Raff Bookstore, which is on Valley Street, you can come and hear me in conversation with Monica Huertas, who is also featured in the book and is one of the founding members of the People's Port Authority, which you'll hear about if you come. Um, so I'll probably read a section of the book that she's in. We'll probably talk a little bit about ways to get involved in environmental justice organizing in and around Providence. And then I might lead the people who are present in an exercise together. And Yeah, I'm really excited. I think you're gonna like it. I think you should come if you're in town. And please wear a mask. I will also have some available for you, but that's a way that I would like to take care of people who live in our community.
Fantastic. Uh, and then this is my reminder to y'all that you should pre-order the book. Comes out on the 12th, right?
The ninth.
The 9th. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. April 9th comes out on April 9th. And it's available through Hatchet. There is a link in the description box to where you can pre-order the book. But also, in addition to that, we are doing a book giveaway. So if you follow the link in the description box to the giveaway page, you can enter to win a copy of the book. We're giving away two, so there'll be two winners. And regardless of whether you enter the giveaway, you should still pre-order a copy of the book and tell your local library to get a copy of the book. I actually feel like this is a really, really great book to do like a local reading group with because specifically the contents of the book are so focused on doing things with others. Also, it's just really great, y'all. I was being very truthful when I said I feel like it came like a really great time in kind of where we're at in this cultural zeitgeist right now. And I felt better having read it, and I felt like I had a much clearer idea of who I am, both as a person, but also just specifically as an activist. Like, knowing my specific flavor of climate activism kind of is I felt much more sure of my direction there and what I'm doing with the 1 year sustainability challenge and everything. I wanted to give you an opportunity to shout out some people that you'd like people to go check out and follow.
Yeah, absolutely. So a book that I have found useful is actually it's a workbook by uh, William Godbian, I think is how you say this person's name, and Jovita Ross, called Turning Towards Each Other, which is a conflict workbook. It is like it's very, very, very. Uh, it is a little yoga teacher-ish in certain of its ways, but it also gives you some kind of practical exercises for not pushing conflict away when you're trying to do something with other people, kind of recognizing what's happening to you when you want to start a fight with somebody or when somebody tries to start a fight with you, and ways for kind of working with and around that to let the conflict ultimately be productive and to get you to a new and different place that you actually really need to get to. I like that one a lot. I think Kai Chung Tam's Instagram and Seelan Nugan's Instagram, which I think Lauren is maybe going to put up for
Yes, I'll
you.
put them in the description box. Yes.
Wonderful. Both of those are, I think, useful if you're an Instagram person. And Seelan deals a lot with somatics as a kind of like survival and organizing tool. Kaishangham is more thinking about like patterns of behavior when people organize together and ways to be more constructive and less punitive. I don't love the word constructive, but that's what I got at the moment. And then I really like Alicia Kennedy's newsletter, which has to do a lot with like food. So some of the ideas that Lauren and I were getting stuck on, if I had read Alicia's newsletters more carefully, I feel like I probably would have had better things to say. She writes a lot about kind of the ways that like food, labor, climate, and pleasure interact, both in like restaurant work and in home cooking. And I really like and recommend her lens. And then Martha Crawford's blog, which is called What a Shrink Thinks, is a lot about like how can you use certain practices of like self-knowledge and self-awareness to let go of what you thought you needed the world to be like and what you thought you needed yourself to be like in order to meet the world as it actually is. So those are all just a sprinkling of resources that I would really recommend.
Thank you so much. I have already updated the description box in the video, so when the video ends and you hit refresh, they'll be there for y'all. And then let's see. Was there anything else that you wanted to shout out, Kate, before we closed out today?
Well, if you are able today, if your body will allow you to do this, I strongly recommend going outside, and also if your weather conditions will allow you to do this, I strongly recommend going outside and touching a plant in some way. I like to do this. I think it's good for the mind, and it reminds you that like you know no matter where you are not alone. We are not alone in dealing with this. We are not alone in responding to it. We will not be alone in surviving it. Um, and I think there is a way for a lot of us to survive it. I really do.
Yeah, that was a lovely sentiment to end on. So thank you so much, Kate,
Thank you,
for
Lauren. Thanks for having me.
yes, this was a lot of fun. I'm really excited. This was great. Again, please pre-order the book. It comes out on April 9th. And again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day and go touch a plant.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.